On this episode of your Geek Fix, we'll be making this Pip-boy 3000 from this Fallout 4 Special Edition model and making it look more in-game by adding paint, working buttons, rechargeable lights, and this charging base. Keep watching. This is your Geek Fix. Those of you that saw our Pip-boy 2000 videos probably also saw and got to learn a little bit about the Pip-boy 3000, and it was shown in camera that I actually had this. And so people asked, well, aren't you going to upgrade it? Aren't you going to show it? And the answer is, it was sitting on my table between Mr. Miyagi and the arc reactor, and I just kept forgetting it. But now's the opportunity. I think I got some good ideas on how to upgrade this and to make it look cool. But just for a little bit of history, it's been a long time since these came out. Remember, this came out with Fallout 4. And so it came with a case like this, and it would have everything like a guide in it and some different levels of padding that you would put inside of it to make sure that your phone could fit, and that it would have things at the top that made it look nice. It also came with this stand right here, and also this Pip-boy. Sure, it looks cool. It has a great display value to it. However, it's not sustainable. I mean, I can't just put this out and leave it the way that it is, right? So I'd want some way to be able to power it a little bit better. But this does have some flaws. For example, the phone. Now I have in this a phone that is, like this you can see, I believe that this is the Samsung Galaxy J3. And there's no good way to get it out of here just with your finger or anything. You can't push the buttons or anything. You would literally have to use a screwdriver to pop it out. And also I can't push buttons from inside there. So it's kind of a weakness. Once when I get it stuck back in, can't change the volume, can't push the buttons. So it is what it is. Also, I don't like the fact that yes, it has a light up button. There's a light up button, there's a light there, there's a light there, very much in game, but the Geiger counter and our radio don't light up, and they do in the game. So that was kind of a bummer too. And then the colors. The color scheme isn't right. It looks kind of tan and plasticky, whereas the real one is more of an olive color. So I don't know. It just seemed like a good opportunity to try some things and see how they turn out. Now you might remember from our early Pip-boy films, the Pip-boy that is even on my arm, I actually wore it at the beginning of the very first video. This is a prop from Spirit Halloween, and what I like about it is that it is perfectly shaped. I mean, the window, for example, is the size of the real one in the game, whereas this one is made smaller for the phones. So yeah, a little bit more accurate in its size. It has tons of space inside for putting all sorts of things, and I think it's pretty cheap. I think it was about $20 through Spirit Halloween. However, I think they've stopped selling them. But I thought I'd use it as an opportunity to be able to test some paint applications, and so that's what I did in preparing for today's activity. So once again, my plan is to make it so that all of four of these lights light up, and that I can access a button of some sort to turn on and off the phone, and that I can power both these actually, and charge both sides, and then the paint, to make the paint look a little bit more in-world. So that would be my main goal. So the first thing I'm wanting to do before I can do anything else is to take this apart. And so the best part about filming myself take things apart is that later on I have a reference to get it back together. And there were some difficult and kind of surprising things to remember. I also didn't want to lose anything, so I kept things organized and in bags, especially these small screws. It's also during this process we learned some of the mechanics and design features, like this light and button mechanism. Everything with this model was separately molded and assembled, so it should make it easier to paint and modify later. So everything is all taken apart and is ready to be painted and modified. And hopefully I can remember how to put it back together. But first, let's get painting. Look how clean and nice this paint tent is. Well, we're gonna fix that, aren't we? Now previously I have used hammered paints as a primer before. Last time I used this. This is Rust-Oleum hammered paint, and it works pretty well, but this time I'm going to actually be using some of these Rust-Oleum forged hammered paint and primer. For my first layer I'm going to use this antique pewter. And I'm planning to paint both sides, so first I'm going to flip them over and paint underneath, and then I'm going to flip them over again and paint the tops. And now I've got these pieces that look like galvanized steel, which will make a good bottom layer. You could spray this with a little bit of a sealer first before we put on our next layer, just so they don't stick as well, or I could also go around the edges that I want to still show this through and put a little bit of tape on there. But for the most part, I think I'm ready for my next layer. Now the actual Pip-boy has more of an olive to tan look to it, but I'm going for this also forged hammered metal chestnut color. Now this time I don't think I'm going to use my tent. The reason is because this stuff is made to intentionally spray or splatter. That's part of how it gets this effect. And I want to be able to control that better. So I'm going to instead do this on the floor where I can walk around it and spray. And so now we have all of our pieces done painted wise. And it's hard because I kind of like the way that it looks just the way it is. It has a pretty good color to it. But I'm wanting to do my other treatment on this, so I'm going to go ahead and start sanding while it's still a little bit tacky. To do this, I'm using a fine grade sandpaper, and I'm just going to go around some of the edges first. So all my angles, I'm just going to hit those with the sandpaper to try and bring out some of the metal that's underneath. Now, one of the things I learned when I did my test paint on this Pip-boy is that having this be a tan color underneath really kind of helps it, because it'll give me some of that rust color as well. So it's not a bad thing if I can sand down to the actual Pip-boy. And then in between you're going to also be able to see some of that metal. Kind of a softer sandpaper. I'm going to hit the face of the Pip-boy. If you want it to be really even, you could assemble it first, but it's not the effect I'm wanting or looking for. I want to be a little bit random also with what I'm doing, so I don't want it to be too even. This is supposed to look like it's been worn down over time. I particularly want to hit these vents right here, some of the radio area, any screws and other edges. I also want to try to sand anywhere that I think that water would collect or build up and rust. So now I can attach these together now so that I can move on to my next step and generally know where things are touching and try to give some consistency between the pieces. Now what we're going to use is some Tamaya Weathering Master, which I really like a lot. If you're going to do some rusting features, or even if you're wanting to make something silver, a lot of times people use the Gunpla pen to do some of their metals, silvers. And what I'm going to do instead, like right here where I need to have some silver lines, is I'm just going to take some of the silver powder and I'm just going to brush that on. And what you're going to notice is that this looks a lot more natural. It doesn't look like you're painting over anything. It looks like it is naturally supposed to be that color. But the key is I'm not painting it on, you pat it on. This is a lot like makeup would be applied. And for that reason, what we're really wanting to do, even around our corners, is just use a little bit of, it. So you're just wanting these subtle hints of some color here and there. It's not about actually painting the whole thing or overdoing it. On this, we just want to have these little tiny subtle areas where it becomes obvious that it has some different types of metal going on. I can also do this with my screws. The one thing about it though is I did notice a lot of people are wanting to redo these screws or make them all silver, which you can make the ends silver, but the truth is in the game, the way that they have it is they must have assembled it first and then painted it over, and so for that reason the screws were actually painted as well, and then what you see that is silver is just where the paint wore off. So I'm not wanting to do a ton of this. I'm just gonna add some hints of silver. So now I'm gonna go through with some of this rust color and just add some of these subtle hints of rust, especially around areas like the vents and things like that where I know that it'd be more likely to rust. Again, just add it, dab it on. So now we're done with our weathering. The downside to this sort of thing and to some of the paints that we've used is they do have metallics in them, and that means that they are dangerous to breathe in, they're dangerous to get in your eye or in your neighbor's eye. So for that reason, you want to be careful with these. If you're not an adult, get someone to help supervise you or to assist you in doing some of these things. On the flip side, this next step is definitely a little bit more dangerous and unpredictable, and the reason for that is because not only are we using some metals, but also we're going to be using some agents to be able to rust those metals. So this is our rusting kit. In this case, I'm using the Modern Masters Metal Effects Rust. And I have used this before. It works really well. I will say from my previous experience, I think it's better to put it on very little in this case. I want to just make this more of a subtle effect. This is a 3-step process. At the same time, 2 of the 3 steps require more than 1 coat. And each of those coats has to dry for a little while. So we're talking a few hours just to do this, and more than that to make it look right or look well. Now the first step is this primer, but at the same time, I think since we already painted a primer on the device, I don't think we would have to put this on. But I will say this looks really good as rust by itself, and so if you do put it on, I think it really helps the effect. So I think I'm still going to put on at least one of those 2 coats. So as I put this on, I'm just kind of putting it along the corners like I did my other powder, and then also painting some of the inner layers where I want some of this rust to develop. But I want to be really careful. If you do overpaint, you can always use a little bit of a Zeiss cloth that comes off just fine. The instructions say that you have to let that dry for about a half an hour in between the 2 coats, and so we'll let that sit, and then I add another coat, literally painting over the same areas. After we've waited another 30 minutes, we're going to put on our iron effect. This one I don't like as much. If it doesn't become rusted, it doesn't look great because it does look like a dark iron, and it's pretty smooth and consistent. So this one also, I'm going to try and put it on only where it had previously rusted, and I'm going to try not to put on too much. I mean, really not wanting to put on more than little dabs, or just covering my edges, some of the areas that I've also already painted in that rust color. Add a little bit more after 30 minutes. So we let that sit for about 30 minutes. And then I'm ready for my final step, which is this spray. The problem with this spray, from my experience, is that anything that it touches, it will oxidize, and it adds this white crusty stuff because it does have some salts and things like that in it. So for that reason, I want to cover anything that I don't want to be affected by that, or leave out the electronics until I'm done. When we spray it on, we're spraying it in very thin layers. The instructions say a light coating, and then we let that sit for about 5 minutes before we spray a second coat. It says it takes about 40 minutes before it develops into a rust, but I have found it actually starts to do that much faster, and if we wait about 3 hours, it starts to look really good. So I actually really like the way that it came out. I think that's partially because I didn't do too much. When I did my test paint on this Pip-boy 3000, I did find that I've went a little bit heavier in that rust, and it works for the style that I did on there. But for this, I did want it to be a little bit more subtle, and it came out that way. So pretty happy with my rust effect. Now, one thing I didn't mention was that I took this outer screen and also painted it, but I painted it with a black hammered paint primer, and so for that reason it's going to have a little bit of a different look, and I decided I want to keep this kind of nice compared to any rust that's taking place on the rest of it. So I'm keeping it separate until the very end, but I do like the contrast that it's going to provide. So now, in case you're wondering, you're probably looking at it and thinking, when is he going to put on the lettering? Why isn't he put on the lettering yet? And there's a good reason for that, and that reason is that I forgot. I think I got distracted by the paint process, and I don't know, I completely gapped it. Now, I will say this, in the concept art, it didn't have lettering painted directly onto it. Instead, it was actually done using a labeling gun, which is true with the previous Pip-boys. But since they did paint it on, I'm going to try and do the same. Just the problem is now I've already done some of my special effects. So this isn't a problem. I can still put on my lettering. I can even add the effects afterwards. But there's two ways that I've learned to do this lettering. The one way is the way that I did the previous Pip-boy, which is to cut out the lettering in vinyl and then stick it on. Another way would be to cut out the lettering for the purpose of a stencil and then painting it on. I think personally using some type of sponge would look pretty good to match up with my effect that's underneath. In my case, I went with the letters that I could stick on. I did that because I wanted more of that lifted effect that I saw on the other Pip-boy. I also went back with my weathering brush and just touched them up a little bit. Now, if you look at the Pip-boy before I did anything to it, you'll see that the button on the front as well as the light on the top were actually clear plastic. I don't know why that is, because in the actual Pip-boy, it's an orange plastic like these indicator lights that I used on this version. So I wanted to figure out a way to do that, and for the first time I decided to use this color acrylic paint, and in this case an orange, which I was concerned about doing because usually it gets real sticky or it glops or things like that. And instead I found, even when I just took it and dipped it like this inside the paint and then let it sit, it actually dried very fast, and it truly dries. I mean, that is 100% dry, and it came out great. The only problem was I didn't agitate it enough, so the button for the top has a few little bubbles inside of it, but otherwise it looks great. It came out exactly the way I think it should, so yeah, pretty happy with that. So that brings me to my next step, which is lighting this. As I mentioned earlier, the front light and the top light lit up, but that was it. The radio and the radiation meter or the Geiger counter didn't light up, and also there was no way to sustain it. Like, I couldn't leave it on because it was only a 3-volt battery, so it would run out pretty quickly. So for that reason, I decided I want to put in a new battery that I could also charge and also allow it to be on all the time. In this case, this is a Castar rechargeable battery. It even has the USB input right here. This can charge while also running the lights, so that means I can actually leave it plugged in. It will turn off and on that charge as it needs to. I connected that to a switch and 4 warm LED lights. As far as where I'm going to put that switch and those lights, I did discover when I was taking it apart, I found out that this button was designed in such a way that it could push on a switch on one side while having the light on the other side. So I decided to use basically that same idea when I put it back together. And one thing that's interesting about this is actually the areas that I want to light are pretty much set up for it already. All I had to do is just put the lights in there, one right next to the radio and another one right underneath the Geiger counter, and it lights it perfectly. I also went back with this electric tape and put a bunch of it in there to prevent any type of light bleed. Similarly, I want to be able to charge the phone and leave it charging should I want to leave it on all the time, and add some buttons so I can control the phone. So to fit a charging cable at the bottom of the phone, I cut out this area right here, and then I used an angled charging cable that's female to male to be able to extend my charge. Speaking of buttons, one of the major complaints with this model is that it tended to break on a couple of the buttons. One of them being this knob on the side, another one being this button on the top. The button on the top, when you pushed it in, it would tend to break first time around. In fact, it broke on me as well. I didn't realize it only had a couple of small pieces of plastic that held it up and gave slight resistance. So the first time you would push it down, it would break. And so I went back, and initially I was going to put in something that was more of a mechanism, but decided I didn't have it operating anything or doing anything, so I decided instead to use this sponge sanding block and just cut some pieces and stuck it underneath, and it works brilliantly. I can push down on it, gives me the right amount of resistance, and it works really well. As far as the knob on the side, the big problem people ran into is that eventually it seemed to break, and then it wouldn't turn just right. It seemed to have some kind of spring on the inside, and so I removed all that and I put in an actual rotary switch, and it works great. The only problem was somehow beforehand it seemed to fit, and when I got it in there now it seems like it pushes out a little bit too far. But that's okay, that's something I can go back and fix later. The next thing that I wanted to do was to put a power button on the top, because like I said, when you closed it, the problem is I couldn't access the phone, so there's no way to turn it on or turn it off or to do other things that would involve buttons that might be necessary. So I disconnected this hinge that's on the top that was part of the faceplate, and I drilled a hole down right through where the button would be on the phone, and stuck a nail up through that so that the flat part would be pushing on the power button. And then I put a spring on top that would allow it to be able to be pushed back up whenever I push down on it. So now when I push down on it, it will turn on the phone. It will also turn off the phone or put it into sleep mode. And I will say, I think that initially they intended for people to be able to turn off and on the phone or push the power button when using it, because when you go into one of the mini games, for example, pushing on that top button will pause the game, and then when you push on it again, it will actually count you back into the game. So I thought that was pretty neat. Definitely worth it. The problem with disabling that hinge is that now there's nothing to hold the faceplate on. So I ended up drilling out these screws and then replacing them with real M screws that are actually holding on the faceplate. So 3 of them are holding on the faceplate. One of them is just to make it consistent with the other screws. Another problem with making that permanent, where the phone is stuck in there, is I thought I really needed to have a way to be able to still access the home button, just in case. So initially I thought of it as a reset button. That means you'd put a hole, and the hole should go right in the second vent down. And I got impulsive and used the wrong drill bit, and in the end ended up ruining that vent. So that's another thing that if I went back, I probably wouldn't put in there. At the same time, something I will say is that when you're in the apps, if I go into my music apps, for example, they all have buttons to get out to the home screen, which then allows me to go into my Pip-boy app. So that means that I can listen to music while I'm playing, even when I'm not connected to the PS4. So now my Pip-boy works and looks great. I can put it on my stand and it looks good. But the problem is it won't charge, or I can't leave it on all the time like I do the other Pip-boy. So for that reason, I wanted to make my stand where I could actually charge the Pip-boy every time that I put it on there. And so I decided in the end to use something actually that I am using for another project, which is this magnetic charging cable. So the very end, the micro USB actually connects by magnet to that and then begins charging. So all I needed to do was to find a way to get this cable to stick up through my stand in such a way that I can just put it right on top and the magnets will connect and it'll start charging. So the first thing I did was took this apart. All you have to do is just flip it over and pull off these feet. And I'm going to take those and just toss them because I won't be needing them. I'm actually going to replace them with some thicker feet in a minute. Unscrew the screws that were hidden underneath. And then I drilled 2 holes into the bottom of the base so that now I can stick those cables through. Then I'm going to drill some holes through those clear plastic pieces. Make sure that you put it on top of a block first. Then I'm just drilling from the bottom through to the top. Then I'm going to remove the excess plastic from those posts. Now I have holes that the cables will fit through, but how am I going to get them to stay in there? So I went to the dollar store where I found a bunch of these tubes for balloons and also these stands. And what you do is you just cut the tube off where you need it for the length of the 2 posts. And then we'll stick the cable through the stand and then through the tube, which you might have to assist using a screwdriver or something. Then I'm going to put those into place where I need them, right here and right here. Then I'm going to take the bottom and just put that back on, screw it back on. And then I'm going to use these thicker feet that I found that are clear and put those on. And now it's nice and flat for when I put the Pip-boy on, at which point it should start to charge. And with that, it's ready to go on my shelf. Let us know if you like this build. Also, let us know in the comments if you'd like to see me try playing Fallout with this Pip-boy. Like, subscribe, comment below. Make sure that you click that reminder bell so you won't miss out on our Pip-boy Mini or our 3rd Pip-boy 2000 video. In the meantime, this was your Geek Fix.